Hi, my name is Suleiman, aka the Last Code Bender. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to build a REST API using Node.js and Express. Okay, so what is API? API is an application programming interface that allows application to communicate with each other. So, for example, using the diagram below, to explain it is that for example, let's say this is our client, yeah. So now a client can actually make a get, post, put, and delete request to our application server, and then our application server will now get the user request and processes, and then send the user back a response with the result. Okay, and the response is in a JSON format. And what is JSON? JSON is a JavaScript object notation that is used to send and request data to our REST API. Okay, and then the API that we are going to be building is going to be a a CRUD API for players. Yeah, and then what is CRUD? CRUD is an acronym for create, read, update, and delete. Yeah, and then they all point to the post, get, put, and delete HTTP method. Don't worry if you are confused. Don't worry, you are going to get you are going to see this in an action in a bit. So now, before we get started, the next thing that I want to show you is that if you don't have Node.js installed in your machine, you need to go to nodejs.org and download Node.js and install it in your machine. I will recommend you to install the current version, which is, I'm using, that came in with a lot of features, such as it's going to allow us to use the import method. Okay, and then the next thing that we want to do is that we are going to use Postman to be testing our API. So if you don't have Postman installed in your machine, I will recommend you also to download and install Postman before we get started. Okay, so let me jump into my VS Code, and this is my VS Code. As you can see, I have an empty folder called Node Express Video. All right, so now to create our project, no, before we create our project, after you finish installing your Node.js, you want to check the version of your Node.js. You do npm-v. You are going to see the version of your of the node that you install in your machine. And then in my own case, I think the version the version of my Node.js is 6.14.10. You can get maybe higher, lower, I don't know. But anyways, so now to create our project, we do npm init -y, and then this command is going to create a package. Look at it, it's going to create a package file for us that contains the name, the version, the description, and a lot of things of our project. Okay, so now the next thing that we want to do is to create an index file, index.js file, which is the main file of our application. All right, so now here the next step that we want to do is to do import. We want to import Express. Sorry, before we import the Express, we have to install the Express. All right, so now let's do npm install Express. Let's save. All right, so now let's give it a time. It's installing our Express. I don't know, depending on your internet speed, but mine, as you can see, all right, so now we've installed our Express. So now we come here, we do import Express from Express, just like this. All right, and then for us to use this import, for us to use this import, we have to go to our package.json here and add one settings, and it's going to be type module. All right. So now for us to use the import, we have to go to our package.json to add that settings. All right. So now the next thing that we want to import is called our body parser from body dash parser, like this. All right. So now this allows us to use the body of our income request, and that's why we are using it. You are going to see that in action in the in a few minutes. All right. So now the next step here that we want to take is that we want to initialize our express. We want to initialize express. So, and then to do that, we do const app is equal to express. Okay, and it's a method. And then the next thing that we want to do, we want to initialize the middleware of our body parser. All right. So I want to initialize the body parser middleware. All right. To do that, we do app.use body parser.json. All right. And this means that we are going to be using JSON in our application, and JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, as I said, and then it is used to send it is used to send and requesting data to our REST API. All right, we are going to see that in action in a bit. All right. So now the next thing that we want to do is to listen to our port. Yeah. So now let's say const port. Our port is going to be, we want to listen to port. Let's say 500. Sorry, 5000. And then app.listing want to listen to this port, and then it's going to have a callback function, and then we just want to console.log something like we use the backtail. We could say server running on port, and then we now use the template string ports, and then our port. All right, that's it. So now the next thing that we want to do is to test our server. All right, and to do that, you can do npm start, or you do node index. Index means we are pointing to this index.js file. All right. So wow, we are getting error. Let's see the error. Listing address port 500. Okay, this means that our port, the port that we are trying to use, is in use by another application. So we need to come here and change the port. Let me just change it to 4000 and come back here. Let me do clear, and then let me run it again, and then you see server running on port 4000. All right. So now when we go to our browser, When we go to our browser and do localhost 4000, we see an error like nothing cannot get this. All right, so let's go back to our code editor and then do something like let us do app.get, and then this is app.get. This is going to take in a callback function that has a request and response, taking a request and response, and then we just want to send something to our browser. And let's do res.send. You can use the h1 tag, for example, h1 hello bash like this. Alright, so let's save it. Let's save it and go back to our browser and refresh. Oh, okay, I forgot. We need, anytime we write something like this, we need to stop and start our server. Alright, so now to start our server, you do Ctrl+C and then you run it again. Alright, and then we go back to our browser and refresh, and we get the hello. Alright, so what we don't want to continue doing is stopping and starting our server anytime we make changes. Alright, and then to achieve that, there's a package called nodemon. Alright, so now we are going to install nodemon for us to achieve that. So now to do that, we do npm install --save -dev space nodemon. Alright, so this is going to install, I don't know if you can see my screen. Alright, this is it. This is going to install nodemon. So yeah, so now our nodemon has finished installing, and then the next thing that we want to do, let me close this place, is to come back to our package file and set it here. So we do start, we do index, we do nodemon index.js. So alright, so now the next thing that we want to come here, we just do npm start, and that's it. So now our server is running on port 4000. So if you come here and make any changes, let me add something like world, for example, hello world, and then save it. And then when we go back to our browser and refresh, we now see hello world. Alright, so now the next thing that we want to do is to make our first GET request of our players. Alright, and then to do that, we come here to our application folder and create a folder. We call it routes, and then inside this route we want to add a file called players players.js like this. Alright, so now the next thing that we want to do is to alright. The next thing is to open your player file, and then we do import. We want to import express from express. Alright, and then the next thing is to bring our router. So we do const router, no, not this router, is equals to express dot router like this, and it's a method. And then our first get request that we want to make is router dot get, router dot get like this, and then it's going to have a callback function that takes in request and response. And then here what we want to do, we just want to print out something to our browser. Res.send inside the router. So alright, so now the next thing here is that we want to export it. Export default router. Alright, so after we export it so that we can use it in our index.js, we have to bring it in. So now here we want to say player, we want to import player routers from router routers / players. Alright, players.js. Alright, so now we want to do something like for us to use this router, we have to tell Express to use it. Alright, so now app.use. So anytime we have this request API, or API / players, what we want to use is the router. Alright, so it's that simple. So now let's save it and go back to our browser and do /API / players. Something's wrong. Let's go back and see. /players. Okay, there's an S here. So /API / players cannot get API players. Let's go back and check what's wrong. We have players here, app that's used. Okay, we have to put / here. Okay, and then when we come back and do refresh, and then we have inside the router. Alright, so now then here, the next step here, we want to actually return back players, like the players players from our database. Okay, so when you come to our router here, we want to create const. We are not using any database like MongoDB or MySQL in these tutorials. We are just going to create a temporary database that we are going to be using. Alright, so now, and this is going to be our temporary database. Players is equals to an array of players, and then here is going to take a JSON array. So the first element in our JSON is going to be ID, which is going to be 1, and then the next thing is going to be our first name, like this, which is going to be call it Cristiano, and then the last name is going to be Ronaldo, and then the club, and then the club has to be Juventus, like this. And then let's create another player. Let's call this guy, give me another player name. Let me just say Henry or Mo Salah, Club Liverpool. Alright, and then when we save it, and then okay, ID here is gonna be 2. So when we save it and go back to our browser and then refresh, we are not seeing anything. Okay, we have to send it back. So now here, instead of sending this guy, we want to send our players. Alright, so let's go back to our browser and then refresh, and then this is it. This is what we're having. Right, let's start using our Postman to test our API. So let me copy this guy, and then let me go to my Postman, and then let me create a new request, paste a new request, which is going to be a guest request, and then API players. I want to get all the players and then send, and yeah, boom, this is all our players, okay, from our API. So now the next thing that we want to do is to create a post request that is going to save a new player in our database. Alright, and to do that is very, very simple. Here what we want to do is to just duplicate this guy and say post, and then whenever someone posts, we want to save a player. So since we are using an array of database, what we want to do, we want to push the player into our array. Alright, and then to do that, this is post. Let me comment on this. Let me say get all players, and this is the route to save a new player. So to do that, this is once we get a post request to save a player, what we want to do is to get the request. So const player is equals to request dot body. Let's just print this guy. Let's just print this guy to our. Let us send this guy to see what we are getting. Alright? Let us send this guy to see what we are getting for now before we actually save it. Let's just print it back to the user. So now let's go back to our Postman and copy this player, for example. So we want to make a post request, and it's going to be JSON params. How I forget this? Let me just come here and make a post request. So we come here and do new tab, post request. Then we come back here and copy this player. We want to post this player, and then body, row, and then text, JSON application. You must select this JSON application slash JSON. All right. So now we want to send another player. So now let me just call this guy. Give me another player. Lacazette, or I don't know. I've forgotten the name of players. Okay, let me just use the old players. Maldini. I don't know his Pablo Milan. And then so now we want to send this guy, and then let's just copy this guy. Alright, and then send like this. And then as you can see, we are getting back what we actually posted. So that's what we want to see. So so now to do that, to save this guy in our array object, what we want to do is to push it inside. Okay, so we now say you can do something like players.push player. So after we push the player, we want to bring back something like let's use backtail. The player with player, let's just say player save successful. Okay, we don't need this backtail. Let's just do normal. All right. So now let's save it and go back to our Postman, and then let's send it again. What we are getting, the player save successful. So when we come back to our request and do get all players request, let's do get request. So you see here we're having 3 players. We have Cristiano Ronaldo, Mo Salah, and Maldini. Let's add another player. Let's add player like let me call this guy Ben 10 Madrid, for example, and then player ID 4, and then let me send it. The player save successful. If I come here and do get all players and send it. So we are having Ben 10 with the ID 4. Oh, this is a mistake actually. This is a mistake. So the next thing that we want to do is that let's go back to our database and just delete everything here. Let's just delete everything. So we don't want to have a static data, we want to be adding it. So that if we come here and do send request, we have an empty array. So now we have to add a player from here. So now number one, we want to add, for example, Cristiano Ronaldo Madrid. Yeah, so now save it, and then when we come here and say get all players, we get Cristiano Ronaldo Madrid, and then when second player that we want to add is Rio Ferdinand. I hope that's how to spell it. Ferdinand, and then Man United. All right, and then save it. Oh, sorry. The ID here is supposed to be 2, but I'm still making it 1. 2. We're having an error, so we'll come here and do get all players. We get Rio Ferdinand 2 and 1. All right. So this is it. Our next thing that we want to do is to create a route that we can get a particular player. All right. So let me just copy this and paste here and just say with ID. All right. Again. Alright, so now our next thing that we want to do is that we want to build an endpoint where we can get a player with a particular ID. Alright, so now to do that, we come back here. Alright, I'm paste here. So now let's just say get a player like this, and then here we want to pass in the ID of the player, and then it's going to take request and response, and then let's just do something like let's get const, let's get the ID of the player is equals to request dot request dot params dot ID. All right, so now let's just print send back the ID and see. Let's just send back the ID and see. Alright, so now this route here is going to get a player by ID. Alright, get a player by ID. Okay. Alright, so now when we go back to our Postman, let's create another route, another get request and test. Okay, let's just say player slash, let me say 10 4. So now we're getting back the 4, right? So now what we want to do is that we want to save a player in our database and then get that player using the ID. All right. So now let's go ahead and do that. All right. So now to do that, let's just do const. Let us say result const result is equals to players dot find player going to be a function that's going to check if player.id is equals to ID, like this, and then it's going to return back the result, and then we want to print back the player. So we want to send back the result. Okay, so now let's give it a try and see. So now let's go back to our Postman, and then the first thing that we want to do, we want to save the player. Let me save this guy. We have Rio, then do number 2, Cristiano again. Cristiano, I love Cristiano Ronaldo. He plays for Juventus. Okay, and then save, and then let me do number 3. Number 3, the simplest name is Mo Salah, and then he plays for Liverpool, like this. So when we go back here and we get all players, so we get 3 players, 1, 2, 3. Rio Ferdinand, Cristiano, and Mo Salah. So now we want to get Cristiano Ronaldo, right? So now let's come back here and do number 2, send, and then that is it. We're getting our Cristiano Ronaldo. So now let's say we want to get only the record of Mo Salah, no, Rio Ferdinand, for example. Rio Ferdinand, his ID is 1, and then let's send, and then we are getting Rio Ferdinand. Alright, so now the next endpoint that we are going to be creating is going to be a delete endpoint. Like we want to delete a player in our database. Alright, and then to do that, what we want to do, let's go back to our editor and do let's say delete the player from DB, for example, and then this router is going to be router dot delete. Alright, and then it's going to be like this, and then it's going to have a callback function as usual, a request and response function. Alright, and then here it's going to be, we are going to get the ID, for example, because we are going to be deleting by ID, so let me just copy and paste that. And then here we want to say players is equal to players of filter. So we want to filter all the players and then find a player, a function, because player dot ID. So we want to check if it's not equal to the ID, and then we delete. So now the filter method will check and see to find the player that's not equal to this ID, and then is going to remove it. All right. So after that, we want to send something like we want to send something like player deleted. All right. So now let's give it a try. All right. So now let's go back. Oh, sorry, we have to do with the ID. All right. I think, yeah. So now let's come back here and let's check how many players do we have. Oh, we have 0 players because so now we have to create player. All right. So now to do that, let's create a player with a post request. So now number 1 is going to be Mo Salah, Liverpool, and then number 2 is, let's say we have Alonso. Xavier Alonso, and he plays for Madrid. And then number 3, we have Star. No, let me say Pablo Maldini, and he plays for Milan. All right, so now we have created, I think, 3 players, and then right now we want to delete. Let's say we want to delete number 3. Okay, we want to delete this guy. All right, so now to do that, what we want to do, let's just copy this exact request and then create another request, and then this time around is going to be delete, right? Delete request, and then we want to delete number 3, which is Maldini. All right, so when we come back here and say delete number 3 and then send, wow, so now we are getting an error, and the error is saying assigning constant variable. So now let's go back to our text editor and see the problem. Router.delete request param.id filter players, it's called player .id, it's not because of ID. What's the error saying? It's saying do you see any error here? Can anyone tell me, can anyone see any error and tell me how to fix it? No? Nobody? Alright, let's check. Let me make this big. Type error assigning to constant variable. Oh, wow. So now I think the problem here is we have to change this guy from const to let's, because constant means constant, and then let's constant, like we cannot change anything from our array, but now we are making it to be let's. Alright, so now let's go back and try it again. So now let's come back here and create our players. Number 1 is going to be Pablo Maldini. Number 2 is going to be Mo Salah. He plays for Liverpool. And number 3 is going to be Rio Ferdinand, and he plays for Man United, like this, and then send it. So now let's check all our players. We have 3 players: Pablo Maldini, Mo Salah, and Ferdinand. Alright, so now we want to delete Mo Salah. Alright, so now let's come back here and say delete request number 2. Alright, and then send it, and then player deleted. Alright, so when we come back here and refresh our players, we get 2 players. So now we want to delete Pablo Maldini. Alright, so now let's come back here and say we want to delete Pablo Maldini, number 1, delete request, and then send, player deleted, and then when we come back here and refresh, get all our players, and then get 1. Let's delete the last one. Let's just delete all the players. We don't need all the players because they are old players. Alright, so now let's delete the last one. Is going to be number 3, right? Delete number 3, and then we want to send a request, player deleted, and then let's refresh all our players, and we don't have empty players. Alright, so now our next endpoint that we're going to be creating is going to be um, an update endpoint. So for example, let's say a player moved from one club to another, so we want to update the club of the player to be the new club that the player moved to. Alright, and then to do that, let's go back here and say update player by ID, player information by ID. Alright, so now here is going to be router.patch. We are going to use the patch method to achieve that. Alright, so now player.patch is going to be like this, and then it's going to have a callback method as usual, and callback method is going to take in request and response like this. Sorry. Alright, so yeah, just like this. So now the next step here, we want to find the user by ID. So let me just copy that and paste here. And then the next thing that we want to do is we want to get all the parameters that we are sending from our request. Alright, so now to do that, we do const we're going to be sending first name and last name, and finally we're going to be sending club, and it's going to be equal to the request the body. Alright, so now the next thing that we want to do is to search the user. Sorry, it's to search the player. Alright, so now this is the player by the ID that we are sending. Alright, so now the next thing here, we want to check if, for example, if the first name is not empty, if first name that we are going to send is not empty, we want to update that field. Alright, so it's going to be player dot the first name is equal to first name. Alright, so we want to do the same thing for last name and club. So it's going to be last name like so, and then club. Alright, so after we finish doing that, the next step that we want to do, we want to send back a response saying that player information updated successful. Alright, so let's test and see. So when we go back here to our Postman, next thing that we want to do, we want to add players in our database. Alright, so now let's add Rio Ferdinand, and then the next one that we want to add is Cristiano Ronaldo. We want to add Cristiano Ronaldo like this, and then Man United. Makes sense. So now let's come back here and see all our players. So now we added Rio Ferdinand and Cristiano Ronaldo, and they are all in Man United. But then we want Cristiano Ronaldo now. Cristiano Ronaldo is in Juventus right now. Yeah, it's in Italy playing for Juventus. So we want to update this record. Alright? And to do that, we come here, we create another request, which is going to be part request, and then let's see body row. We are going to be sending a JSON file, JSON data, sorry, and then what we are sending is we want to change his club. Alright, we want to change his club to Juventus, like so. Alright, but before we execute this, let's come back here and see what we have. Let's get all our players again, and we see Cristiano Ronaldo is in Manchester United, And then let's come back here and do our patch request API. Let's go and get Cristiano Ronaldo ID is 2. Alright, so now let's put number 2. Alright, patch, change the club to Juventus. Alright, let's send. What we have, player, you see player information updated successful. So when we come back here and do get all our players, you can see it's not, it didn't change. Then get all player, yeah, oh, it's changing the first name. Look at the error, it's changing the first name to Juventus. Let's go back to our code and see what's going on. First name, player, the first name is called first name, and then club. You know what? Let's just do console. It's changing the first name to the club. Let's come back here. Postman. And let's just say we want to change all of this again. Let's see where the error is coming from. Cristiano, like this. Cristiano. First name. Alright, so now we get player information updated successful. When we come back here and refresh, and we see it's getting the club twice, updating the club Man United. That's not what we want to do. So let's come back here and see the problem. So now if player the first name, I don't know, okay, let me just bring this guy up like this. Club player, oh sorry, my bad, I've seen the mistake. So now it's going to be club, player the club, it's called club. Alright, so now let's go back to our Postman, refresh. Oh, we don't have any players. Let's come back here and put it. Number 1 Cristiano Ronaldo, number 2 Rio Ferdinand. I think it's like this, Ferdinand, and it's going to be number 2. So send it, and then here let's see our. Alright, so now we have 2 players, and then we want to change this player to we want to change the club of Cristiano to Juventus, for example. So just the club, then we copy just the club, and then Juventus like this, and then send. Player updated successfully, and then we'll come back here and all our players, and then we'll now see, oh sorry, number two, let me change this guy. Rio Ferdinand is still in menu, so Rio Ferdinand's ID is 2, so it's gonna be Man United like this, and then when we refresh we get Man United, and then Cristiano ID is number 1. So when we come back here and put number 1, Cristiano Ronaldo is in Juventus like this, Juventus, and then save it. Player updated successful, and then when we refresh we get Cristiano Ronaldo is now in Juventus. Alright, so another thing that I want to show you before I end this tutorial is that when you look our route, you can see that the route is very crowded. So for example, here like you can see we are getting it's very crowded. It's very crowded. It's not well organized. So what we are going to do is to create a folder here. We want to follow the conventional of MVC, okay, MVC structure to organize our code. And to do that, we come here and do and create a folder. We call it controller. Controllers. Alright, and then inside these controllers we are going to have a file called players.js, and then here what we are going to be doing, we are going to copy all these routes. We are going to copy all these functions inside our player controller. Okay, it's very, very easy. Let me show you how. Alright, so now the first one here, what we are going to be doing is just to cut all of this. Alright, and then come here and say something like exports const dot let me just say get all players like this, and then you paste. That's it. Alright, so let's save it, and then let's come back to our router, and then here we have to we actually have to import it. Okay, and to do that we say import put your curly braces. Let me say get, I don't want to make mistake, let me just copy it. Let me just say get all players from -- v controllers / players.js, like this. Just do a bit of cleanup, and then here when we make get all players request, we want to call this method. Alright, so now let's give it a try and see. Let's just give it a try and see. So now let's see, get all players. Player is not defined. Player is not defined in user Node.js controller player. Alright, so we have to come back here and copy all of this. We have to put this here. Alright, so let's come back to our Postman and send. So we have an empty players. Let's just add one player. We have an error. Let's just finish it. So let's do the same thing for save player. So now let's come here, let's cut all of this. Let's see, exports const save new player is equal to this. So now let's copy it, and then comma, and then like this. Let's do the same thing for get player by ID. Exports const get a player is equals to this. Alright, so when we come back here, and then we have to bring it up here like this, and then the second to the last is to delete a player. So come back here and say exports const delete player is equal to this. Alright, so now delete player, we have to bring it up here again, delete player, and then finally update player. Alright, and then we'll come back here and say export const update player equals this, and then when you copy it, and then we come back here and say update player, and then we have to bring it in again. Alright, so now let's go back to our Postman and test all of this. So now first of all, we want to send, we want to update player saved successfully. When we come back here and we are getting our player. So that is it, guys. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and if you want me to do another video that I can connect this to a real database like, let me say, MongoDB or MySQL, please leave a comment below so that I can do that. Thank you for watching.